So, Frank Woosley, I joined the firm in 1983. And throughout the rest of the 80s, I did basic consulting, learned the business. In the 90s, I led our financial services practice, first domestically and then globally, personally led the practice in Europe. In the year 2000, I became the lead relationship partner for Bank of America. And throughout the course of my career, I always was intrigued by and experimented with contingent fees. And like back in 2002, 2003, like every other partner in our firm, everybody had done about 3 deals, one that worked out okay, one that worked out pretty good, and one that was a total disaster. And I got together with a guy named Tom Friedman in Chicago. Our clients kept asking us for deals. And so I got together with a guy named Tom Friedman in Chicago, and he and I postulated that if we did this on purpose, if we applied lessons learned, which was a euphemism for when we screwed something up, don't do it again. If we, took the lessons and best practices when we actually got something right, if we applied that again, we could actually do this. So we got about 10 or 12 guys together. We studied every big deal the firm had done for the last 5 years and said, if we did this again, what would we do differently? We talked to the partners that did the deals. We talked to the clients. We talked to the staff. And came up with a program. It was time to launch the program, and we couldn't figure out what to call it. So we said, let's call this value-based billing, and then we'll think of a proper name. And so we did, and now we can't get rid of that. And everybody hates that name. So if you decide, and we're going to talk to you about how to do a deal if you want to, if you decide to do a deal and you want to call it something else, that's fine. There's no rules about the name. So here's how our program works. We have a group of counselors, which is myself and Tom, a few other guys, and I'll tell you how to get the complete name. And in this past year, we've trained 11 additional counselors domestically and 9 globally. And if you think about the life cycle of a sale, you start with the idea, and you can call any one of us, and we'll help you think about, should we put a contingent fee around this thing? Should we link some of our fees to results? Then the next step is you put a construct in front of the client. Typically that's a PowerPoint that says if this happens, you pay us this. If that happens, you pay us that. We'll help you build that. You move from there to deal points. And deal points is plain English. Here's what you're trying to do. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we measure success. Here's how we get paid and so forth. And these are the conditions. And you use deal points to negotiate. When you finish with that, we help you convert the deal points into a contract. And then when you actually do the project, we stay with it. Part of the reason that we stay with it is because we have formed an accounting process that moves the risk off of your shoulders onto the firm's shoulders. So if you just think about, let's say you were going to sell a deal that's $1 million. At market rates, and in my vernacular, market rates is however much you would sell this project for if you were competing against 2 good competitors. So it's not standard fees, it's market rates. If you were going to do a value-based billing arrangement, it might look something like the client would pay us $500,000 while you're doing the work, and then as we finish the work, we'll measure things, and they'll pay us somewhere between another $500,000 or another $500,000. So we've got, a certain amount of things we have to do to get back to market rates, and a certain opportunity if we exceed expectations to make an upside. So let's just use this for a model. In our system, when you make a sale like this, if you've worked with Tom or me in the program, you book the sale at $1 million. And as you collect this cash, your work managed that you're accountable for is based on this number. So if you ended the year and you've collected this much, we open up the WBS to reflect the base fee. By the end of the year, you're recording work managed at $1 million. By the end of the job, and that's saying the job ends in the middle of the year. By the end of the job, you're going to be somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million and $1.5 million in our example here. Our agreement with our partners, with our principals and directors, is that you're evaluated at the better of this or actual. So what that means is if you do a job, if you do a value-based billing job in our program and it doesn't work out, that's a risk that the firm took. That's not a risk that you took personally. And the other key stakeholder in this is the firm. And what we do with the firm accounting is we use a series of tools to predict at the outset what a job's going to be worth. And it might, in this case, it might be $1 million, it might be $900,000, it might be $1.1 million, whatever it is, but it's not $500,000 or we wouldn't have done it. We predict what the work is worth, and using our accounting system, we credit this amount of money to the firm across all of our portfolio of jobs. And if a given job ends up ahead of this amount, which is what we hope happens, we keep that money. And we use that to subsidize when a job comes in below this amount. Now, we tend to do this pretty carefully, and so over time, we have more jobs that end up above the expectation than below, and when that happens, then we dividend that extra money back to the firm. I haven't been able to figure out how to keep that, so we eventually we give all the money to the firm, but this concept, which we call the pool, gives us an enormous ability to take risk. Because I don't know how any of your predecessor firms did this, but before we had this program, if you wanted to do a risk-reward deal, you found whoever your favorite person was in management and tried to get permission for it. And when they did that, there was two answers, and they're both wrong. One is they would say, well, you can do it, but you've got to change all these things, and invariably that would sort of screw the deal up. Or they would say, you can't do it, and maybe that was a deal we should have done. But anyway, either way, after you did the deal, everybody's terrified of it not working out, and it causes aberrant behavior. And when we compete and we're doing deals, we explain that to our clients. We explain how our investment portfolio works, why that gives us the courage to take risk, and if in fact something doesn't work out, could be our fault, could be the client's fault, could be the competitor did something, whatever it is, we'll live with the downside. Over the course, we've been doing this for about 10 years, and on average, the jobs that have gone through our portfolio, which is over $1 billion so far, averages about 20% higher margin than the same type of work that's sold a traditional way. So the firm has a lot of interest in doing this, and they have interest and we have interest in expanding it. The first 4 or 5 years we did this, our portfolio was pretty small. It took a while to get, the biggest constraint, quite frankly, is our partners are scared of doing risk-reward deals. So at first it was pretty slow. We would count, many times we'd start down the path of doing a value-based billing deal, and we would end up with a traditional fee. We called it a win traditional, which is, we got halfway through the negotiation, and the client said, let's just do this the normal way. We tracked those, and we measured them, and interestingly, on the traditional wins, we had a higher than average close rate and a higher than average profitability. And all we did was measure and report that so we could stay in business and continue to push our program. So think about this as 2004, 2005. Well, it got to be 2008, and the economy started to tank. And then we said, we sort of did a head slap and said, look, if whatever we were doing caused a higher close rate and higher profitability, what was that? And perhaps we ought to try to replicate it. And so I'm going to take you through an exercise here. Help me outline a proposal, every consulting proposal since the beginning of time. What's the first section? Problem. Our understanding of your problem. And we can say that better than the client because we've had more experience and we can use longer words and so forth. Okay, then what comes next?
Scope.
Yeah, scope, our approach. Here's what we're going to do to solve it. Okay, and we love this part. This is 900 pages of PowerPoints with tiny little font, and this is where we spend all of our time on our proposal writing this. Okay, then what comes next? And this has got all the, there's a lot of things you'll think about, but I put them all in an approach, like the critical path and the organization structure and governance and all of that, how we're going to solve the problem. Then what comes next? That's part, I'd put that into approach. Now, all of that's assumptions, timing, all that's is how we're going to solve it. Yeah, price. The next thing is the fee. And how do you get the fee? Hours times rates. Right? Okay. And then what's the last part? No, this is a proposal. We're not contracting it. Pardon? Why us? Why Deloitte? Because we've done this before, and all of our friends like us, and and this is identical to everything our competitors say. Okay, so this is our proposal, and every proposal I'd written looks like this. And when we started the VBB program, my partners would call me and say, "My clients take this thing, and what do they do with it?" They go right here. They knew the problem. It's their problem. They don't really in this league. They don't care much about this. They believe that that we're capable of solving the problem. They wouldn't be talking to us. What they really care about is here. So they go to the fee section and they say, "I got a problem. Your fee is." What do they tell you about your fee? It's too high for 2 reasons. What are the 2 reasons? Yeah, 2 reasons right here. You got too many hours in it, and your rate per hour is too high. We have just dumbed down this whole conversation into the thing that's least important in this entire document, and this is what we're arguing about. So my partners would call me and say, "Frank, we've got to do one of those value-based billing deals because this is what happened to me." And so we replace this with ours, and we say, "Okay, you're going to pay us a base fee plus an incentive fee that's a function of success." Great. Then we start actually reading our proposal. And what's missing?
How you define success?
There's no definition of success in here. Have you guys heard from the QRM guys yet?
No.
Just tomorrow. Okay, you'll hear from if you happen to put a definition of success in a proposal, they'll make you take it out because it creates risk. So you try to do a risk-reward arrangement. The first problem is that there's no definition of success in here. So you have to go after your problem statement and say, what is success? And how would you measure it? Then it gets really scary because when we start looking at a definition of success, why do we start throwing up? Let me give you an anecdote. So some team called me and they're doing a competitive bid to create a strategy for a jelly company. And it's about $1.7 million for the strategy. And the client said, "We want you guys to have some skin in the game." So they know, they said, "Skin in the game, okay, that's Frank and Tom, so call those guys." So I went to see the team that's building the proposal for this strategy, and I explained to them that we won't do a deal where we get paid based on anything other than results achieved. So if you're doing a deal on a strategy, that means we have to have a meaningful role in implementation, and when the implementation is successful, we'll measure something, compare it to the business case and the strategy, and that's how we get paid for the strategy and for implementation. So we won't finish a strategy and have the client do some kind of, we think this is a good strategy or bad. You don't know if a strategy is any good until you try to implement it. So I explained that and said, "But you guys are good. We're going to make a good strategy, so we'll take a bet on it." Before the orals, a couple of these guys got me aside and said, "Frank, we don't want to do that because we know that they're not going to be successful with the strategy because their senior management team is dysfunctional." Now think about that for a minute. We're about to sell a client a $1.7 million program, regardless of how they pay for it, where we're pretty sure it's not going to work. That's what gives consulting a bad name. And if we ever were the people we wish we were when we grew up, we would walk into the orals and say, "Unless you fix the dysfunctional part of your executive team, we don't have anything to talk to you about. And here's how we could do that." The problem, after you've got a clear definition of success, is this approach may not solve it, may not achieve it. And it gets very, very black and white when you say, "Here's your problem. This is what success would be and how you would measure it." Then you begin to thinking really hard because often this approach is what we like to do, or it's what we did the last time, or it's what we're good at. But it's not necessarily everything that would take to achieve that. Everybody with me so far? So this is what we've learned since we started doing this. And if you want to do a risk-reward deal, this is mandatory. If I was in charge of the firm, which I'm not, thank goodness, I would make this mandatory every time we did a proposal. But this is what a proposal should look like. It should say vision. This is what your vision is, and the vision is the corollary to the problem. Your problem is you've got a big swamp and it's full of alligators. Your vision is you're going to open up a hotel and make a lot of money. It's so but the vision and the problem are pretty much the same thing. The next thing is the value proposition. And the value proposition says, what is it worth to you if you get this right? And we almost always leave that. You don't have to take notes on it. I'll show you later where this picture is in your stuff, but value proposition. Then the next part is, these are the challenges. This is everything that you're going to have to overcome in order to realize that vision and achieve that value proposition. And then you talk about Deloitte, the Deloitte relationship. Here's how a relationship with us would resolve each one of these challenges. And it may not resolve all of them. Doesn't matter. It should resolve some of them. And then you get into the journey, which is, this is the series of steps or phases or whatever you want to call it that it's going to take to do all this. This is a vastly different discussion than this one is. Think about this one. This is about us. It's our way to articulate your problem. This is about us. This is our approach. This is about us. It's our fees. And this is about us, which is all the good things we can think about ourselves. This is about the client. Saying to the client, this is what your vision is. And a lot of times when you take the time and energy with your intellect to articulate the client's vision, they haven't seen that before. They haven't thought about that. Getting this right, quite frankly, is a major step forward for most projects. The value proposition is incredibly important. The reason the value proposition is important is because a client will tend to underfund something when they don't think about what it's worth. Because when they were back here arguing with these fees, they were saying your fees are too high. They're doing that out of muscle memory. That's just what you say to consultants, your fees are too high. Case in point, I got a call from our B of A team a few years ago, and they said, we're trying to do one of those value-based, we need to do one of those value-based billing things because we're trying to sell a client a $400,000 piece of work and he's only got $200,000. I hate that because that's too small. We don't charge our time into your books, but it's still overhead. Putting a deal together creates some overhead, and too small of a deal, that's hard. So, but I used to be the relationship partner at Bank of America, and I knew something about him. So I said, well, tell me what you're into. They said, this guy is trying to do a diagnostic to figure out if our technology rationalization thing would help them any. So, well, what's the technology rationalization thing? We've got a service that we can look at all of the unused software that's in every desktop. Okay, that's good. How much would that benefit the bank? And he said, we just did this for the federal government. It's about $7,000 per desktop. There's of net present value of unused software. How many desktops do they have? 370,000. So if you take 300, I have no idea what that number is, but if you take 370,000 times 7,000, that's a really big number. And we're arguing over $200,000. And what happened is that we landed on this piece right here. The first piece is a diagnostic. We landed on the diagnostic, and this guy says, I want a diagnostic of something without thinking about all the rest of this. And so we hadn't really figured out what the value proposition was. We're talking to the wrong guy. We're talking to the Joe Jr. assistant vice president who's been asked to go look into this. And that person is not our client. That person becomes our advocate because we work with him to create this picture. And then this is in the billions. And then he and us go talk to somebody in the C-suite that cares about $1 billion. Because what we're interested in is making this journey with them. These chevrons could be the diagnostic, it could be some kind of design, could be a pilot, could be implemented. These would vary depending on what your problems is. But that's why the value proposition is critical. Then you get to the challenges. This is foreign to us, and this is, of all of the things that we do, this is the hardest for us to think about. For one thing, we just haven't worried about that in the past. When we do time and materials, what we're really doing is we're going to do a great job with this approach, and somebody mentioned deliverables. We're going to do a great job delivering the deliverables that we contracted to deliver. Whether that solves the client's problems or not has kind of not been front of mind to us in the past. It should be, but when we start investing our capital and betting on it, it has to be. So part of the reason this is hard is just we're not good at doing it. The other part of it is it's not natural to us. We're used to going into a sales opportunity and saying, here's your problem. Okay, here's our approach. Our approach is really good. And impress somebody with our approach so they'll hire us. And the last thing we really want to do, all of us that grew up doing this the old way, is to go in and say, this is going to be really hard. This is going to, you've got to overcome this and this and this and this. And particularly we don't want to say that if we're pretty concerned that our approach isn't going to fix it. On the other hand, when the client gets done this way, beating you up on the fees, and you say, yeah, I know my fee is higher than my competitor, but what? My why us is the same as my competitor. I've done this 10 times. I got 3 clients that'll vouch for me. But on the other hand, if you sell it this way, it's a lot easier to pinpoint on the fact that my approach is dealing with all of these things and my competitor's not. The competitor's doing this the old way where he's bowled you over with 100 PowerPoints. So getting a complete list of challenges is tricky. And usually the challenge is, one of them is they don't know how to do it. And the solution there is our approach. Another big one that we see almost every time is the inertia in the organization. More often than not, when a big project fails, the reason it fails is not because the consulting was bad or the idea was bad or the program was bad or the deliverables were any good. It was because the organization didn't adopt the change and refused to adopt it. And there's a lot of others, and these, of course, are unique to whatever you're doing. And the last one sometimes is expensive and risky and underfunded. So when we think about these things, we talk about what are the problems. The problem you don't know how to do it. Okay, we've got an approach. We actually can take you through that. Inertia in the organization. We've developed a thing called the shared vision and goal alignment. And when I started this program 10 years ago, we told the organization that 1 out of 10 jobs probably wouldn't pay off, but 9 out of 10, the other 9 would, and the net of all that is we'd make some money. And they said, all right, let's try it. We've done this 300 times now, and we've had 2 really big jobs that we really took a bloodbath on. And both of those, we went back and looked at it. And one of the key requirements for a risk-reward deal is a goal. We call it goal alignment. So if you're paying me to, drain the swamp and remove the alligators and paint the buildings, I'm going to turn around and say, well, what are your executives getting paid for? Because if they're getting paid for the roof not leaking, then we've got a problem. So it's important that we have our goals aligned. And what we used to do before we got into these 2 big problems is we'd have a nice strong contract that said it's essential that our goals are aligned. You've assured us that they are. If it turns out while we're doing this work they're not, and that causes the work to fail, you have to pay us at least market rates anyway. To find out at the outset if the client is really confident that the goals are aligned. And clients in both of these 2 tough jobs looked at that and said, absolutely, yeah, well, they are. We got into it and found out they were. The CEO had told his direct reports, here's the marching orders, let's go get it. And they'd said, yes, sir. But 3 levels down, where you got to a lot of people that had to make decisions, the goals weren't aligned and they weren't going to get aligned. And in both of these situations, the client said to us, I know we said that in the contract, but we got no value out of this, so we're not going to pay you. And in our firm, we don't sue our clients, almost never. And so because they say, they waive the contract, said you can enforce this, but you'll never do business here again. And I know they've talked to you, but most of our business model is about long-term sustainable relationships. what we learned out of that was that the onus was on us. A contract is not enough to figure out goal alignment. So we went to our human capital function, which Mike was running at the time, said, Mike, we got this problem. He assigned some people to that, we funded it. We created a thing called the Shared Vision and Goal Alignment Diagnostic. And this is it's a correlation to this is a financial diagnostic. The SVGA is a inertia in the organization diagnostic. It's about $200,000 worth of work. It's 20 to 30 live interviews across a cross-section of the senior management, coupled with 400 or 500 web interviews. And we tailor this to every job. But it gives us output that scores across 10 dimensions that we compare to a database across these 10 dimensions and say wherever something shows up red, we've got a problem. So when we're going down a path with the client of taking a risk, well, first of all, if inertia in an organization is a concern, we've got a way to test for it. And of course, we've got this massive, wonderful human capital practice that can fix it. And when we're taking a risk with a client, it's mandatory that we test for this and we correct it. The last thing down here is expensive and risk, and particularly, you guys ever seen that the graph of when you can affect? This is time, and this is effort. Effort influencing success. So in a normal project, when do you work the hardest to make it successful? This is effort trying to succeed. It goes like this. You're getting towards the end and you're really staying up all night, you're trying to make it successful. And the corollary to that is when you can actually most influence the success of a program is like this. It's at the outset. And what happens is a client, because they're scared that stuff might not work and it might be throwing money away and it might be a bad idea, they tend to underfund these early, very critical steps in a journey. And so if it's expensive, it's risky, underfunding, that's when we use our VBB program. So our VBB program started as a simple way to do risk reward. It ended up being one tool that we use to solve these problems. But if your primary purpose is to do a risk reward arrangement, you still have to do this. You still have to think about what's the value proposition, because that's how we're going to get, that's what we're going to measure to get paid. And you still have to figure out what are all of the barriers to success, because if we can't figure out what the barriers are and how we're going to resolve them, it's a bad deal for us. It's a bad deal for the client too. But if this is an issue, it's expensive and it's risky, then value-based billing is a solution. So what we look at that is, let's say this is $1 million and this is $2 million and this is $5 million and this is $20 million. We'd come back and say to the client, this is the part that's really bothering you. So in this first $1 million, if you'll put up 200, we'll pay 800. And this next $2 million, by the next $2 million, your risk has gone down. You're not quite as scared, but you're still pretty scared. So there, if you'll put up 800, we'll put up 1.2 million. We might split this with you, and we might go 60-40 out here. So this is how we've talked about how we'll invest with our client during this journey. So you think about going from some junior person called and said, I've got a $600,000 diagnostic, can you guys do it for $200,000? To coming back to them and saying, this is a journey that's worth $100 million or $300 or $30 million or whatever it is. You've got to do all these things and we'll invest with you all along the way. It seems pretty straightforward. This is vastly different than the way we typically sell. A $100 million program says if the client really has an interesting vision and it's really worth a lot, if we can get to somebody in the C-suite, and the $100 million is a euphemism for a lot. So if this value proposition is $100 million or more, it's going to create $100 million of net present value or $100 million of improved earnings per year, or something fairly substantial. If we can get to somebody in the C-suite and show them this picture and say, maybe with the title joint venture on it, we want to take this journey with you. And if you're interested in doing that, we'll put up the first $1 million back here pretty much on us with no questions asked. Which means if we get to right here and you're uneasy about moving forward, we'll write it off. And so all the way through this thing, there's never any guarantees that, that the client has to stay. If the client decides at some point to stop, we've predefined what that means. But the $100 million program says we'll put up $1 million. And my partners, as typically happens in this firm, have interpreted that to mean $2 or $3 million on a couple of occasions. Up front here, if our partners, if you believe this thing really has legs on it, and we can get to somebody in the C-suite who says, I want to make that journey with you guys, we'll make that bet. And the reason we're doing that is because this program, our classic value-based billing program, has been going really well. It's making a lot of money. And Tom and I are looking at how to move it to the next step. And we think about if we made 10 big deals, $10 million bets that are see the difference between the $1 million I'm talking about right now and this $1 million we put up here earlier. The $1 million we put up here earlier is sourcing, and we're going to count a bunch of things and we're going to get paid. This $1 million, all we're going to do is finish with a clear definition of the value proposition and the business case and see if the client wants to move ahead with it. And if they don't, we're out. The reason we want to do that is because if we do it 10 times, 5 times it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to write off the $1 million. Now we're writing off $5 million. The other 5 times, 2 or 3 of those are going to turn into big traditional deals, and 2 or 3 are going to turn into big risk-reward deals. And a big risk-reward deal might be 30 or 40, $50 million on which we make an extra 10 or 15 million. So if we get 1 of those out of 10 bets, we're fine. No, it could be done anywhere. We think about when we have, like right here, we're 800, if we finish this step, we've got $800,000 in it. Right now we've got $350 million in our pool. We've got, $800,000 is a rounding error. It's not very scary. By here we've got $2 million in it. We start getting concerned. We would think about how serious that issue is, how much we're talking about betting, and we'd work that in somewhere where it made sense. We're doing a deal at Johnson & Johnson right now, and we can't run the SVGA yet because during this first step, we're getting a clear definition of the vision. Well, you can't test whether people's goals are aligned with the vision if the organization doesn't know what the vision is yet. So we've got to do the definition of the vision and the business case and what's going to happen. We've got to coach leadership on how to articulate the vision, and then we're going to have to test whether people get it or not. So you do that whenever it makes logical sense. Right, and we've started using, we finally beat our lawyers into submission. We use the words partnership and joint venture a lot. We'll have a heading on this thing that says, instead of value-based selling approach, which you would never say that on something you're going to hand a client, you'd say a joint venture construct to realize your vision to open a hotel or whatever it is. And we're talking about investing with you and sharing some of the returns. Self-funding is another good word. No, and we've only done that twice, and we've only got 1 proposed right now, and we absolutely won't do that. In other words, you have to call me and we'll talk about it. We can't do a contingent fee with a restricted entity. We've tried. We've had a dozen times where we did 100% at-risk deals, and some of those worked. In the early years when we were really uneasy and risk averse and were scared about this thing, we studied our portfolio a lot. When we looked at, after 3 years, we looked at where the deals we'd had trouble with, small, not these big deals, but small deals that didn't pay off very well. All the ones we had trouble with were the 100% at-risk deals. And what happens when you're 100% at risk is the client has no skin in the game, and I can show up with the team and talk to the client and say, how's the Deloitte project going on? And the client will say, I don't know, there's a bunch of Deloitte guys back in the room, but I'm not really sure what they're doing back there. It becomes our project and not their project. So we have, just like the restricted entity, we have a policy that we don't do 100% at-risk deals, and we've got 5 of them in the portfolio right now. So we just think really hard about those. because it is a much higher risk. Right, we do that. The issue is, do we have a, quote, meaningful role in implementation? Meaningful role means, are we running a program office, or do we have a person or people in the program office during the course of the execution of whatever the strategy was? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, do we have adequate governance, which is what I just described? So if we're monitoring the degree to which all of the senior level people are doing the headcount reduction and they're not doing it, have we got the access to the top levels of the organization that we can tell them immediately that this thing's off the tracks and you got to fire this guy because he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing? And did we do our work at the outset to see, is this important enough to the client that they're going to make the hard decisions to do that? Well, first, there's some rules, and if you go to the value-based billing website, so in Deloitte, if you go to DeloitteNet, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little thing that says literature or jump to, and the first thing you got to learn is you got to click on jump to, because otherwise you just put something in, it'll take you to white papers from 15 years ago. It's a trap to see if anybody's told you about jump to. You put jump to VBB and you go in there, there's a CXO deck that has a lot of this information in it. But to do a deal, we'll put 10% at risk, downside and upside, on just about anything. Qualitative, quantitative, whether the sun's going to come up tomorrow. I mean, we'll make that kind of bet.
Limit the upside.
The upside and the downside have to be balanced. Yep. Because when we studied the bad deals that we got in trouble for, egregious upsides got us in as much trouble as anything else. If you do $1 million worth of work for a client and the client has to pay you $10 million, it doesn't matter how much understanding you had at the outset, nothing good's going to come of that. So upside and downside have to be balanced. The 10 up and 10 down on just about anything, but if you're going to have more risk reward, then you have to be doing something that creates economic value. And the reason is because if it doesn't create extra economic value for the client, when it's successful, the client has no extra money to pay your upside. So if a client says, all of my employees hate me, and we can do a project to figure out why they hate you and fix that, and say if we could get from 100% of your employees hating you to 60% of your employees hating you, that's our fee. But if we could get it down to 20%, we should have some upside, some huge upside. It's that we tend to not do that, because even though all of the guy's employees love him, he doesn't have any more money to pay us. And so, so economic value is important. But we often, so it is quantitative things. We won't ever do anything where the client, and this is my partners always want to do this, let's just finish the job and let the client tell us whether they liked us or not. That's really bad, because the client figures out the best way to save money is to disagree with whatever. We've just incented the client to be mad at us. So we won't do that. In the quantitative world, though, we've learned to measure things that impact economics as opposed to purely the economics. We tried to do some deals where we said we're going to change cost of goods sold. I defy you to isolate whatever you did and say that had any impact on cost of goods sold. But back in this pricing thing, if you said if right now your salesmen are violating from this principle 98% of the time, and here's a quantitative analysis that shows if you could get that violation down to 40%, it would create this amount of money. When the client agrees to that, then we agree that what we'll measure is the change in the violation as opposed to trying to actually find that money. So we've learned to do things like that. But qualitative stuff is okay, but if it's not going to create economic value, we'll limit what our upside and downside is on that. You've got to be able to figure it out at some point what your goal is. You can't, if it's something that we're not going to have any idea, like we're going to go shoot roulette all night and we don't know how we're going to end up until the end. But let's say your guess is, we're doing this at Covant right now, a pharmaceutical company. Our guess is that we could help them create 2 new business lines that will total $40 million a year in additional revenue. How precise is that? We don't really know. But that's the value proposition, $40 million. Here's all the challenges. First thing we did was design the products, did a market study and a business case. And at the end of this project, at the end of this piece right here, now we have a goal which is $37 million. We're going to further refine it here, and then we're going to actually do it. In our deal with them, even we're doing this piece at risk, which is when we finish this, we're going to come up with a business case and an algorithm. So the business case and algorithm come at the end of this first phase that define how we get paid back for this investment as well as for the remaining investments. The contract, when we do a deal like that where we're making a bet and we haven't defined the algorithm of how we get paid, the algorithm says if we get to this point and we can't agree, the contract says if we get to this point and we can't agree on the algorithm, here's how we separate. And what we typically say is it has to be something that hurts both of us, which causes us to get that worked out. And to date, we've never gotten to this point and not been able to work out the algorithm.